Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte. Nick Binedell, the Dean of the Gordon Institute of Business Science, better known as GIBS, one of the top 40 business schools in the world. We'll hear more about that later. But what many people don't know about Nick is he's not just an academic. In fact, he's an entrepreneur. But going back a little, Nick, you, from a very young age, you traveled. You seem to be quite a gypsy in your youth.
It was my parents more than me. They dragged me along. I lived in 6 countries by the time I was 10. So I was born in what was then Rhodesia, and then England and Germany and Kenya and Yemen and, of course, South Africa. So we came back here when I was 10. So I had a multiple software in the early format.
Reason for that?
My father was a Second World War fighter pilot, and I think he enjoyed the lifestyle of the Air Force, and he stayed on after the war for some almost 20 years in various countries training pilots.
Interesting. Just as an aside, I visited for the first time last year the beaches of Normandy, and beautifully maintained they are by the Americans. But you get a sense of great regret that those young men, what they gave their life up for, seems to have all been forgotten nowadays.
You know, it's so funny you should say that. I just read one of my colleagues' fathers, who was an infantryman in the Second World War, his 200-page personal story of nitty-gritty of what he went through. And it is sad that that's what history does. We tend to remember bits and pieces, and we lose the nitty-gritty of just how courageous and brave those men were.
Did your dad ever express any resentment?
No. He very seldom. He was highly decorated. I got his logbook the other day. He passed away 2 years ago. He flew 89 combat missions and won a DFC, but he never talked about it much. In later years, I'd get odd bits out of him. I think it was a generation that had a particular value system, and part of that was that they didn't sort of indulge themselves in the glory of what they did.
Well, perhaps we could use a bit more of that today.
Probably.
Nick, the formative years of your life then were spent traveling a lot. Do you think that was a big advantage, or might it have given you other challenges?
Well, it's interesting because, we lived in so many homes and we constantly were on the move, so it left me with a somewhat restless appetite, a curiosity about otherness, whether it's countries or cultures or people. I suppose in some ways it was unsettling, but I went to one high school, so I went to lots of primary schools, one high school, so then there was a long period of stability, and I relished the fact that I was exposed to so many languages. I learned the languages. I learned to speak Arabic, although sadly I forgot it. But I think it was a great exposure, and South Africa has a lot of that now. If you're curious and you're willing to work at it, there's so many cultures and stories in this country of ours that I think the same thing can endure for everybody.
Interesting point. One of my mentors, also like you, a PhD, Donnie Cronier, said that he felt every time one takes an international trip, it's almost like going back to university and getting another degree.
Absolutely. I think I've learned as much from travel from any studying that I've done, especially in Asia. As you know, I've spent made so many trips to Asia, and it's been a massive inspiration for me to see it at all the different levels of individuals and what they do, of organizations, and how countries have managed to turn themselves around through hard work and discipline. And of course, the other nice thing is they were more or less my height, so that was always inspiring too.
You aren't 6'6", putting it differently. But interesting, talking about travel broadening the mind. Neil Ferguson, is he a gentleman whose books you read?
Yes, I've just reread Civilization. He's an extraordinary writer, and I'm reading The Cash Nexus now.
Well, going back to Civilization, where he talks about the Western civilization's advantage, one of the big ones was that they were exploring at the time that other, perhaps more advanced civilizations were
more inward.
Introspectively.
Yes, I think that's true. I've just read Ian Morris's new book on how the West won and why. And he argues, of course, that we're rebalancing the world, and that's why China and Asia is doing so well. But he argues, interestingly enough, that geography may no longer matter. It's more the mindset, which I think Neil Ferguson wrote about so well, the 6 killer apps of Western civilization, which was so powerful.
That mindset and the way that you approach things at GIBS and the way that you go to work every day. You've got the advantage of running a business. It's a substantial business, GIBS, but also being able to lecture from time to time, and I'm sure imprint your views or at least your thoughts onto other people who are or onto the faculty.
Well, it's more the other way around. I learned so much from them. Both in this country and elsewhere. I was in Europe last week teaching 60 MBAs from 20 countries. And that was just the most extraordinary experience. So we learn a lot from the executives who come to the school. And of course, we like to share what we're experiencing in whatever it is we're doing.
If you put superimpose all of that onto the South African situation right now, where we're debating issues that others perhaps have left behind a long time ago.
Well, I'm not so sure. I think everyone's now going to debate really serious issues. In a way, we are in an epochal change. I keep thinking back to the end of Victorian England. 1912, England was one certain world of empire. By 1914, all of that began to change, and by 1918, it had changed. So I look at the uncertainties in markets, at the US, at Europe, Japan particularly. They are questioning some very fundamental things. So in a way, they're catching up to our dynamism. And I think it's a very dynamic time. And it's very open-ended and often uncertain, sometimes scary. But I think mainly an incredible era where three big things are driving the landscape. It's the move from the West and beyond, the rest and the West. It's the incredible impact of the internet age, which I'm beginning to think, like many others, is a bit like the Industrial Revolution. It will change everything. And thirdly, this generational dynamic that we're seeing around the world, which is really, I don't think we understand yet, but is certainly a phenomenon.
What about this discussion around, and where I was leading to, was nationalisation?
Well, I think it's important we debate these issues, and I think the debate is a good one. I think it's got off to the wrong direction. I don't believe that nationalisation is the answer to South Africa's competitiveness or to dealing with the central problem of our time, which is inequality and poverty and unemployment. But it is a debate that the ANC sort of let slip, and we in business maybe have also let slip. And it's firmly on the agenda. As you know, I believe politics drives economics, and politics is central to South African life. So I think it's a timeless debate. The nationalisation debate hopefully will lead to other debates and other actions. And a bit like CODESA, we will sit down and find a way to negotiate the way forward that benefits all South Africans, and perhaps a little more creatively than we have in recent times.
But it has raised new fears, new concerns amongst people who perhaps don't have as open a mind as you do.
All change provokes fear. If you think back to the late 80s and the early 90s when we were going into the CODESA phase, I would say business and middle-class people were deeply fearful of the outcome. And we misread each other from both sides. And we found each other because ultimately we have one common interest, which is we are interdependent, we need each other, and we live in the same backyard. And I think when crises come along, and I'm not sure that this yet has the pressure to force us to resolve it, but if that pressure really does build, I think South Africans are creative and resilient, and we will have to map out a way to deal with this issue, because this issue is not going to go away. You can't have a democracy with this level of inequality and have a healthy, sustainable society. We have to close this gap. The answer is not to redistribute what is, and that's where the private sector has such a critical role to play. The answer is to create new things, and we have to push the private sector and help the private sector get to the idea that we are an unequal society. We're a developing economy. There are plenty of opportunities.
Nick, in discussions, and we have many of them, you have said numerous occasions that the secret to South Africa's future, or the answer to its prosperity and future, all lies in entrepreneurship. And you haven't just spoken that, you've in fact made very significant concrete steps within GIBS. Why do you feel that entrepreneurship is the answer?
Because I think entrepreneurial life, and this can apply to sport, to politics, to civil society, the entrepreneurial way of thinking, of seeing what new opportunity there might be, of a better way of doing something, is an innate human characteristic. It sort of comes along with survival. If you're going to survive, you have to deal with change. And, the world does not need our permission to change. So new markets open up, new technologies provide opportunities. I believe that's the central character of a great country. And South Africa has a lot of it. It's just not in all the right places. So I think that business itself it can be a healing agent. It can be a creative agent. We want to believe in why we work. And so in the private sector, we want to believe we're doing a good thing. And when we look around us, there is so much good to do. So let's get on with it. Let's do good business and let's compete. And I think entrepreneurial thinking and the individualism is an important issue for us. The self-belief and the idea that you can make a difference is central to the entrepreneurial spirit.
But how do we overcome our history? And how do we overcome those who like relying back or going back into history to perhaps explain away deficiencies?
It's a very tricky question, that, to which I don't think there's a simple answer, because in many ways the future is merely history ready for action. In other words, they're powerful stories, structures, issues at work that make a country what it is, whether it's Vietnam, Singapore, or Belgium. They're different and they're present, always present. The past is always present. The thing about innovation and change is the ability to see that past and then, as we did in the 90s, leverage our commonality of purpose to make something new. So you can never abandon the past. I wouldn't want to. I think the thing that makes me South African and you South African is the story of how we got into the room. Sometimes we don't know each other's stories well enough, but we certainly know our own. And I wouldn't want to let go. That's what makes me a South African person. So I think history is a compelling notion. Your identity is tied to history. But how you got into the room isn't enough. The question is, how do we get out of the room? How do we grow the economy, make us competitive, form the trust and respect we need with each other?
I suppose it's a lot of listening.
It is a lot of listening. It's a lot of curiosity. And you were referring earlier to this unusual childhood of moving around. I think the essential human trait we need in South Africa, apart from the trust and respect, is curiosity about each other. We should be constructively curious about othernesses. And in that way, I think all top leaders do that. It's that essential inquiry of what is this, why does it work this way, how might it be changed? That curiosity is critical in a country like ours.
Nick, just going back to your own background, you spent a long time at Wits University, 11 years, and it appeared, and before that you were with Barlow's in business. You're a bit of a sticker, so you're with Wits for a long time. You've been with GIBS now since starting on the whole project in 1998, so you're in double figures there as well. Is this something that you like to be seeing out to your old age, working at GIBS as the head?
Well, one never knows what happens next, but I've so loved what I've been privileged to do. You know, the invitation by the University of Pretoria to start a school and being given the freedom to do it in hopefully a creative way that would make a difference was fantastic. And I love what, my colleagues and I relish what we do. The ability to work with so many people is a fantastic privilege. And so I don't see why I would want to change that. I love the link between business and education. I think that education can make a difference to how we practice what we do. We learn mainly by doing, by the way, not by studying. But the studying is a complement of understanding good and bad practice. And I'm totally committed to that. That has been the work that I have been privileged to do for over 20 years now.
But a lot of the people who you'd come into contact with, or the people who pay your salary at the end of the day, the students at Wits, initially and now at GIBS, have this drilled into them that they shouldn't stay too long in a job. Often I talk to chief executives who say, well, I've been here for 5 years, 7 years is like the length of time I should be here, and then I need to move on. Is there not some kink in our own thinking there?
Maybe we should keep this as a secret between us, because often people do move too quickly. And there's a value of staying and really intuitively and subjectively understanding what you're doing. I think business is as much an art as it is a science. In fact, often executives, when they swap industries, don't do so well because an industry is always complex. Human activity is always complex. And in today's modern world of running big companies, they are especially complex. So you can argue it both ways. I think if you start falling asleep at work, in other words, if you're doing the same thing over and over and you stop thinking, well, then it's time to move on. But if you're still being challenged by what you do, and if you can lead by creating change, then being in one place I don't think is a bad thing. And look at the great champions, the Buffetts and the Jack Welchers. These guys had a lifelong career in one organization. It's dangerous to do that, but so long as you're paying attention and able to change your agenda, I don't see why one shouldn't stick with it.
There's so much knowledge.
Apart from which, I'm not sure anyone else would employ me. This is what I've learned to do, is to work in a business school, and it's been wonderful.
There's so much knowledge, so much wisdom that many of us have got from you, Nick. Isn't there a book in there somewhere?
Well, there might be, but in the daylight, I'm fully occupied doing what I do now. And maybe at some point I'll try and jot down a few thoughts. But, the school is so busy 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, that occupies a lot of my time and attention. I'd like to stick with that.
Nick Binedell, the Dean of the GIBS Gordon Institute of Business Science, one of the top 40 business schools in the world. An Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte.